Ever get that feeling like someone's trying to sum up a fireworks show, like with just words?
Instead of just like letting you actually see it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel about Nietzsche sometimes, you know? All these amazing quotes floating around, but ripped out of context, from his actual work.
Totally. Like you're getting the Spark Notes version.
Yeah. So today we're ditching the sound bites and diving headfirst into the mind of Friedrich Nietzsche himself. And our guidebook for this little adventure, his book Beyond Good and Evil.
Buckle up.
And what's cool about this deep dive is we're not just working with Beyond Good and Evil itself.
Oh, yeah. We've got the excerpts, of course, but
We've also got this awesome editor's intro from the Cambridge edition. Like, this editor really sets the scene for us. It's not just what Nietzsche is saying, but like...
the WHY behind it. Why he said it that way.
Okay, so it's kind of like, to really get this book...
You got to get inside his head a little.
Yeah. Like, walk a mile in his shoes, or however that goes.
Right. And the editor really highlights how deeply personal Nietzsche's philosophy was. It wasn't about handing down these big universal truths.
Right.
He believed that truth was something you had to, like, wrestle with, something shaped by your own experiences.
Your struggles. Everything.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm already seeing why he's a thinker you really got to engage with, not just, like, casually read.
And that comes through so strongly in his writing style, too.
Oh, yeah.
Super provocative, using these short, pointed aphorisms. People might read him and be like, wait, what just happened? Where's the flow?
Did he just, like, shuffle note cards or something?
Right. But it's totally intentional. He wanted to shake readers out of that passive reading mode.
Make you work for it a little?
Exactly. Piece things together yourself.
So it's like he's saying, don't just borrow my conclusions, come along for the ride.
Yes. Think alongside me.
Okay, that's a challenge if I ever heard one.
Right. And this ties directly into his critique of traditional philosophy. He saw so much of it as kind of hypocritical, honestly. Philosophers claiming this objectivity, but really they were.
Pushing their own agendas.
Exactly. He even questioned this whole idea of a will to truth. Like, what if sometimes we actually prefer comforting lies over harsh truths?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
Right. He talked about this period as the honeymoon of German philosophy. Everyone was obsessed with finding this pure, super sensible realm.
But maybe
Yeah.
at the expense of, like, dealing with actual reality.
Yes.
Which makes you wonder, are we guilty of that sometimes in our own lives? Choosing the easy way out.
All the time, probably.
Okay, Nietzsche, you got our attention.
Uh-huh.
Now, how does Beyond Good and Evil actually fit into all of this? Like, what are some of the big, mind-blowing things he's saying?
Well, the editor really highlights how crucial psychology is to understanding this work, because Nietzsche really digs into why humans believe what they do.
Okay.
How our desires, our fears, our prejudices, they all color our sense of what's right and wrong.
And I'm guessing he doesn't hold back.
Not even a little. He literally says a philosopher is like a terrible explosive, in the presence of which everything is in danger.
Well,
Right. And get this. As far as materialistic atomism goes,
yeah.
this is one of the most well-refuted things in existence.
Talk about a reality check.
Yeah.
But, okay, for our listeners who might be new to Nietzsche, before they think he's just here to blow everything up, what's the point of all this?
He's clearing the way. He wants us to rebuild, but on a stronger foundation, our understanding of morality, truth, even philosophy itself. But to do that, we have to start by understanding ourselves.
Okay, so he shakes things up, makes us question everything we thought we knew. Where do we even begin to rebuild?
That's the question, isn't it?
I think this is where we got to dive into the heart of Beyond Good and Evil. All right, so we're questioning everything, even like where our sense of right and wrong comes from in the first place.
The roots of morality itself.
Exactly. Which brings us to maybe Nietzsche's most famous idea.
And the most misunderstood.
For sure. Master and slave morality.
Yeah, reading him now in the 21st century, you got to be ready for it.
Yeah.
He uses these terms that immediately throw up red flags.
Yeah, master and slave.
Yeah.
Not exactly the friendliest words.
Right.
So for our listeners, how do we even approach this idea without, like, freaking out?
It's so important to remember Nietzsche wasn't like prescribing a social order.
Right.
He's analyzing how these different value systems actually emerge. So imagine two groups, the masters, the ones in power,
Okay.
and the slaves, those without power. He's saying each group develops a morality that reflects their situation.
So more about psychology than actual literal masters and slaves.
Exactly. Like the masters, as he describes them, they define good based on their own values. Strength, nobility, even like ruthlessness.
Boldness.
Yes. They're life-affirming, driven by this will to power. And it's not just about dominating others, it's about reaching your full potential. Like, think of the Greek heroes Nietzsche loved. Achilles, Odysseus.
There's a certain something about them, right?
Right. That daring, that drive.
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So if the masters are saying strength is good, what about the people on the other side of that power dynamic?
Exactly. That's where slave morality comes in. It's a reaction. Weakness gets reframed as goodness. Humility becomes a virtue. Resentment. Righteous. Think about it. If you're constantly told your natural impulses are bad, you might start to internalize that.
So your moral compass is being influenced by whoever's holding the map, basically.
Exactly.
Does he give us, like, real-world examples of this master-slave dynamic playing out?
He does, and it's fascinating to track this idea through history. He even talks about how the very concepts of good and evil themselves might come from this master-slave tension.
Wow. So even words we think of as, like, fundamental could be rooted in this power struggle. This is blowing my mind. But if he's not saying one morality is inherently better, what are we supposed to do with this?
He wants us to be aware,
Okay.
to ask ourselves, am I following this moral code because I really believe it, or because it's been, like, hammered into me? It's about taking ownership.
Owning your values.
Yes.
Okay, master-slave morality. Crash course complete. But how does this tie into another one of Nietzsche's big ideas, the will to power? Because I think a lot of people hear that and they immediately think it's about
World domination.
right, like something kind of scary.
It gets a bad rap. But Nietzsche meant something much broader. Think of it as this fundamental life force, this drive to overcome, to create, to become the best, most realized version of yourself.
So not brute force, but a striving.
Yes.
Like an artist pushing their craft to the limit, or an athlete training for the Olympics.
Exactly. It's about self-mastery, about channeling your energy towards something meaningful. And this connects to another key idea in Beyond Good and Evil, the free spirit.
Okay, so the free spirit is driven by this will to power, but not in like a tyrannical way.
Right. They've moved beyond those traditional restrictive moral codes. They question everything, including their own values, and they forge their own path. Nietzsche says they're destined for independence and command.
I'm noticing that word command. Is there still like a certain forcefulness to this free spirit?
Oh, absolutely. They're not afraid to stand out, to challenge norms, even if it means being misunderstood. Like, Nietzsche lists things the free spirit avoids getting stuck to. People, homeland, pity, even their own virtues.
Talk about cutting ties. So
Yeah.
we're like constantly evolving, never settling for easy answers.
Exactly. And that's where Nietzsche's own writing style comes in. It's like he's modeling this free spirit approach to thinking. He even directly addresses the reader, challenging us about language, perception. For example, there's this whole passage where he talks about how hard it is to translate the tempo of a style. He says it's grounded in the character of the race.
Wait, is he talking about how like different languages have different rhythms?
Yes.
Like how Italian just sounds different from, say, German.
Totally. He even says Germans are almost incapable of a presto in their language, meaning they lack this certain lightness.
A quickness.
Yes. He compares German prose to, and I love this, Rococo taste.
Uh-huh. He really goes there. So he's saying even the way we speak can trap us in certain ways of thinking.
And if you want to be a free spirit, you got to break free from those linguistic chains, too. He also talks about how our senses themselves can distort our understanding.
How?
We try to fit these new experiences into our comfy little categories instead of actually seeing them for what they are.
It's like that saying, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. But he's saying that's about our ears, our eyes, our whole sensory experience.
Exactly. And he pushes us even further, questioning the will to truth itself. What if, he asks, our most cherished beliefs are built on something really unstable?
Okay, that's getting a little uncomfortable. Are you saying this deep dive might unearth some hard truths about ourselves?
Maybe. But that's the Nietzschean challenge, isn't it?
To confront those truths.
To confront those truths, even if they shake the foundations of everything.
Challenge accepted. Okay, listeners, you heard it here first. This deep dive is about to get real. Join us in part 3 as we tackle Nietzsche's views on religion, gender roles, and what his radical ideas mean for us today. You won't want to miss it. Welcome back to the deep dive, listeners. We are really in deep with Nietzsche now, and you know what?
It's about to get even deeper.
It is. If you thought we were getting intense before, just wait.
Buckle up.
Yeah, because we're about to explore some seriously thought-provoking, even controversial stuff.
See, that's the thing about Nietzsche. He doesn't shy away from the tough stuff, you know? He goes right for it, which is why I think his writing still feels so relevant today, even if we don't always agree with him, you know?
Oh, for sure. And a perfect example of that is his views on religion.
Oh, yeah, he did not hold back.
No, he was not afraid to poke the bear with that one.
To put it mildly, like one thing that really struck me reading Beyond Good and Evil was his skepticism about like the motivation behind religious belief. He suggests it's often driven by fear, maybe a need for comfort, more so than like a genuine search for truth.
Yeah, there's this one line that's like seared into my brain. He says, anyone who has looked deeply into the world will probably guess the wisdom that lies in human superficiality. Basically, it's like we choose to stay on the surface because diving deeper, way too scary.
Right, like ignorance is bliss. And he saw religion as this way of doing that, creating these stories that comfort us.
Instead of facing like the cold, hard truth.
The abyss.
Right. He even compares religious people to wounded children clinging to like this distorted view of the world.
That's harsh.
It's a lot, even for Nietzsche. But I kind of see where he's coming from. When you think about it, religion offers answers to these huge existential questions. And yeah, that's comforting, but maybe it also prevents us from like wrestling with those questions ourselves.
Totally. And for Nietzsche, that struggle, even the painful parts, that's where the meaning is. Like, he's not saying spirituality is inherently bad, but...
Don't use it as an excuse.
Exactly. Don't use it to escape from reality.
Okay, so that's religion. Very Nietzsche,
Yeah.
to say the least. But there's another big topic of Beyond Good and Evil we got to talk about, one that is still so relevant today, gender roles.
Yeah, and this is where, like, understanding the context of Nietzsche's time is so important. We're talking late 19th century where women's roles were limited, to say the least. And Nietzsche, while capable of such incredible insight, he's still a product of his time.
Right, and this is where it gets tricky. There's this passage where Nietzsche's talking about the fundamental problem of man and woman. And he says, denying the abysmal antagonism between the sexes makes you shallow in instinct. How do we even begin to unpack that in 2024?
It's definitely a statement that makes you go, whoa. But if you go a little deeper, I think what he's getting at is that historically, men and women have occupied these very different roles, right? With different strengths, different weaknesses.
He's not saying it should be that way.
Right. He's not saying it's set in stone, but to completely ignore those differences, that's naive.
So he's not saying men and women are destined to be like at odds, but
Yeah.
there are these fundamental differences that like we got to figure out how to work with.
Yes, exactly. And he saw this push for, you know, equal rights, equal education, all of that as potentially erasing those differences, which he thought could lead to this bland, like, uniformity. And remember, this is the guy who's all about the unique individual.
Right, the free spirit who defies categories.
Exactly. So for Nietzsche, embracing difference, even tension, was a source of creativity. It's how we grow.
It's not something to be afraid of.
Exactly. And he applies that to the relationship between men and women, too. But, and this is important, he does it in a way that, well, it can be hard to hear today.
Totally. Like when he talks about how women are enlightening men about the woman and sich,
Right.
and that this is one of the worst developments in Europe's general trend toward increasing ugliness. Yikes.
Yeah, not his finest moment. But if we can get past the colorful language, I think what he's getting at is this fear of losing something essential about femininity.
Yeah.
That grace, that playfulness, that ability to like chase away all cares, which honestly, who wouldn't want more of that?
Right. It's like he's saying women don't need to become more like men to be equal.
Right.
Their strength is in being authentically themselves.
Yes. I think that's a generous reading and one I think we can work with, but we also have to acknowledge that language, it reinforces some really old-fashioned ideas about gender.
Absolutely. And it's on us as readers, as thinkers, to recognize those contradictions.
Yeah.
To take the insightful and leave the outdated behind.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is what makes Nietzsche so fascinating. You know, he pushes us to think critically.
To question everything.
Everything. Even our most deeply held beliefs about, well, everything. Gender, power, the nature of truth.
And you know, that right there is the beauty of the deep dive. We're not here to give you easy answers. We're giving you the tools to ask better questions.
Exactly.
So as we come up for air from this deep dive into Beyond Good and Evil, keep exploring, keep questioning, keep the conversation going.
Yes. What resonated with you? Did anything make you, like, rethink things? Let us know in the comments.
And remember, this is just one little piece of Nietzsche's work. He wrote so much. So we encourage you to pick up Beyond Good and Evil. and discover the rest for yourself. Until next time, happy deep diving.